everybody, and welcome to another episode of Spill the Tea Tutor Talks. Now, you may recognise this lovely person in front of me right now. This is Miss Liz from Miss Liz Tutoring, and she will be joining us today to talk about a topic which is close to her heart and many tutors, which is all about diversity and representation. So if this is a topic that's close to your heart or something that you're interested in implementing in your tutoring practice, then have a listen to this. So to get us started, Aliza, would you like to introduce yourself to our lovely viewers and listeners today?
Anyway, okay, fine. So, so hi everyone. My name's Aliza, otherwise known as Miss Liz. I'm a Muslim tutor and qualified teacher. So when Susie spoke to me about the concept of diversity and inclusion, it was something definitely very important to my heart. And I wanted to really talk about the importance of it in this day and age, and how obviously as us as teachers and tutors can kind of work together to kind of embrace that kind of concept. But I work with children all the way from phonics all the way through to GCSE, mainly kind of I specialise in phonics and 11 plus. But if I have some of the students who I have obviously seen through to 11 plus and they want me to carry on, my heart won't allow me to stop. So I'll continue all through to GCSE. But thank you very much for having me, Susie.
Well, thank you for joining us today and talking about this really important topic. And as I say, I would implore anybody to check out Miss Liz. You have a lovely social media page and very relatable, but also so many fantastic tips. But getting to the heart of today's matter, diversity and inclusion, I think just to begin with my first question, which is representation in the tutoring community, what inspired you sort of to become an advocate? And obviously it's important for everybody to do their part, but I know that is really something that's part of your identity and what you'd like to share when you work and network and mentor other tutors. And what sort of changes have you seen over the years as being a tutor on this topic as well?
I think for me, obviously the whole idea, I think tutoring comes down to the concept of empowerment as well. And obviously kind of, working around your own hours, doing your own thing. But what I feel like, as I think in general, as obviously I speak for quite a few Muslims, I don't feel like we have representation that we perhaps deserve. And so diversity and inclusion in that kind of regard is really important to me, because I feel like there are lots of amazing tutors out there who are not necessarily just Muslim, but who are Hindu or ethnic backgrounds or different religions, and haven't been able to kind of really kind of been or attract the limelight in some form, shape or form. So for me, I think when it comes to diversity and inclusion, why it was so important to me is obviously being a Muslim, growing up wearing hijab and scarf. I feel like as much as, as everyone can try their best, I feel like there's always almost potentially like always kind of a glass ceiling almost, which I feel like that kind of needs to be kind of cracked essentially. And so for me, I think that's why diversity and inclusion is so important. The world works and, it's a multi-faith world, it's a multi-religious world, and there's so many different, we can't exist as a community or a society unless we do understand and embrace each other's kind of differences and so forth, whether that be neurodivergent, whether that be religion and faith. But one thing I think I've got to say that really inspired me to kind of go down the route of becoming an advocate for diversity and inclusion comes down to Twinkl. And the reason and the reason I say that is because when obviously I use a PowerPoint or worksheets from Twinkl or games or activities, anything, there's always some kind of inclusion included. So for example, whether it's the names, you might have some ethnic names, but you also have people in hijab. I've seen it always almost as far as seeing even like a girl in hijab in a wheelchair, which obviously encompasses the whole concept of send. And it's just such a wonderful thing, because obviously the world is made of so many different people, and obviously that all needs to be kind of respected. So yeah, I think in that sense, in terms of representation, I feel like Twinkl honestly has also been a huge inspiration for me, because I feel like if Twinkl wasn't doing what they were doing, I don't feel like I would feel so passionate about it. If you look at other books or other resources, they don't have the same kind of thing. So the children feel like they also have like a special place in society as well, because they feel included and they feel represented. And I feel, especially as a teacher, obviously we've got to kind of hear those obviously kind of not necessarily concerns, but those kind of ideas that they have as well, and kind of bring them to the forefront as well.
It's such an important topic to embrace, and I think it's that notion of never becoming complacent about these sorts of things. And so in terms of those inclusive educational materials, it's very kind that you mentioned Twinkl, and I think it's a lovely thing to know that that's being seen and kind of it's resonating with people and children and adults alike.
So I was just going to say, like, especially with my younger students, like for example in year 1 and year 2, when they see their name, like when they see Hamza or they see Ali or they see Mariam, they're like, oh my gosh, that's my name. And it's almost like that moment, like, you know, even like when obviously I can speak for myself as well, like, you know, when you go into a shop and you have like personalized keychains with people's names on them.
Yes.
Super. But we never tend to find that.
Like you say, it means so much, doesn't it, to students? And then especially, I think you touched on even like send and things like that. And like you said, the kind of those worlds when they join, it's even more magical, isn't it? Because you think that everybody's acknowledged then. So no, thank you. No, that's a gorgeous example. No, 100%. So kind of on that note, because this is something that's part of your daily practice, and as I'm sure many tutors do endeavour to do this, but if there was someone who's thinking about maybe acknowledging this and wanting to do maybe a lesson or try and find something, what would you share to maybe a new tutor or someone who really wants to kind of embed this into their practice in the most positive way that they could? What would you share with them?
So I think obviously, so let's say obviously we've got a class of 30, let's say for example, and let's say obviously we've got some Muslims, we've got some Hindus, we've got some Christians, we might have some atheists, agnostics. I think it's kind of that whole idea of like, depending obviously on the concept that you're discussing, but I think like to break it down, first of all, things like even names, even things like if you perhaps obviously are using resources and questions, using names, so obviously that they understand that they've also been heard essentially. Secondly, obviously, you know, visual aid, and I think obviously that really helps obviously children with SEND as well. So obviously if they can see different people of different obviously colours and faiths and so forth, obviously displayed all over the classroom. But I think, so for me, obviously, like I'm a full-time tutor, but obviously if I had obviously my own classroom, what I would have done is like essentially done like little like not stick men, you know, chain men, you know, those things that you used to have, and have them like all around the classroom, but with kind of like different outfits on, and different kind of like symbols and religion and things like that. So because essentially a classroom or, you know, a teacher is their safe haven to some extent, because I was talking to one of my students' parents the other day, and they were like, I think my daughter spends more time with you than she does with me, because I home-ed her. So she was like, I do lots of lessons with you in the day, and then she has lessons at the weekend. And she was like, it's so important that when you find somebody to obviously take charge of your child's education, because education isn't just academic, it's obviously kind of the social side of things, obviously it's the emotional side of things, that kind of just overall intelligence. So I think things like that, so kind of having visual displays, I think that would be a really good thing, using names and things like that, but discussing different things. So would it be like, okay, today, so, you know, I don't know, Hanukkah's coming up, why don't you bring your candles in? So not too heavy. Or for example, it's Christmas or it's Diwali, and just doing everything you can to kind of incorporate those kind of different kind of values and understandings of like those religions. So I know, for example, like Diwali, obviously it's great, there's always fireworks going on, for example. So perhaps kind of incorporate two things, like describe a fireworks display, but obviously because the whole notion of it is kind of centered around the concept of Diwali. So at least it kind of embraces two ideas, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. I love that idea as well. Pay for people. No, that is so nice. And it's something that a student could really just like bond with and recognize straight away, like you say. And it's amazing with it, like you say, if you're a teacher tutor or full-time tutor, and that's a great example about working with the home educated students as well. That kind of, you know, showing them the kind of wider world as well is so important. It's so enriching. And I think the beautiful thing about, especially with younger children, students of all ages really, they love learning about people and different cultures and other parts of the world, don't they? And I think it's just something that they're so excited and enthused. It's just, and they can understand the concept of diversity usually when they're quite young, don't they? I think sometimes, like as grown-ups, we can use that word and think, oh, is that a bit too heavy? But actually, they do recognise it. You know, they do understand, and depending where you live in the world as well, you could have a really multicultural community, or maybe if you live like in the countryside, it's quite small, but you know, it's like everybody wants to connect and learn. So oh, I love that. Thank you, Aliza. Thank you. And so in terms of that kind of promoting, that leads us on to quite a nice kind of sort of other question, really. If you were a tutor and you're looking sort of for those materials, and you've mentioned about like the names, topics, I love that idea, almost like a show and tell, you know, like talk about what's going on, or a festival or something like that, which is really engaging. In terms of what a tutor can do who wants to actively embody this and try and sort of share, what would you say is a really good way to go about it? Because I know sometimes there can be some tutors who might worry, they don't want to sort of like I know there's been tutors who'll say they see like these lovely names and they worry how to say it, or they're kind of scared about saying the wrong thing or teaching it in the wrong way. What would you say would be for someone who's a bit nervous with all the good intentions, but maybe a little bit nervous? What would you say to them?
Definitely. I think, like I say to children, like my children all the time, like obviously we learn from our mistakes. It makes us a better person. But it's also, it's better to obviously like try and to do that. So I do understand with names. Sometimes even like, for example, with like my Irish students, obviously I'll be the first to admit, sometimes I'm like, not quite sure how to pronounce your name. So I will have to ask. But I also know as well, even obviously like from my own, so, you know, the different pronunciations of my name and things like that. But it's still, I think the idea of it being still acknowledged is still quite important. So I think it's also nice even like amongst the students. So for example, like if you have group lessons, so when I create my resources, I will use names of my students. So then it's almost like we're kind of discussing everything in our own bubble.
Yes, that's so sweet.
Yeah,
so
and they
nice.
kind of all feel included. But I do definitely try to make my lessons as kind of festival focused, I guess you could say, or kind of, so for example, we'll do things for like Christmas, we'll do things for Eid. I always make sure like we do things for like Mother's Day, so obviously we write a letter to our mum saying like how much they mean to us, and Father's Day and so forth, and like things like that. Also things like Halloween. But I think because obviously when you're writing obviously in English, like it's obviously, like, you know, imagination is like an amazing thing. It leads to so many different ideas. It's the key to the world, essentially. So it's like you can kind of incorporate different things. So if I know, for example, like some of my students really, you know, are not necessarily passionate about Halloween, but they really enjoy it, or the dressing up side of things, then we'll definitely do something like, you know, along the line of a haunted house, perhaps, and something like that. And then, for example, for Eid, perhaps sometimes, like, especially with lots of like my home ed children, because we've got a bit more time, we might do some poetry as well, like write our own acrostic poems and things like that. Christmas, you know, I get out my reindeer ears, you know, and we do things like that. So I want them to know that I appreciate all of them. Everybody obviously is on their own path, but all those paths need to be respected. But not just only from obviously the diversity side. In terms of inclusion, like with SEND, in fact, my mum's actually a Senko, so I give a lot of my credit to obviously what I've learned is from her. So
shout out to your mum. Shout out to your lovely mum.
So she's definitely an inspiration of mine. So things like, even like, you know, when I am obviously doing PowerPoints, and I think this is really good amongst Twinkl as well, it's so colourful and bright. So obviously for children who absolutely who are dyslexic or have tendencies, they have things like that. I love the fact that obviously you've got different size texts and things like that. And different, even obviously the fact that you've got different abilities, obviously higher, lower, middle, higher, and so forth, and things like that. It just makes them feel like they can do it. So even if we do have a group, and you know, sometimes people will say to me, oh, but it's hard to kind of manage a group because we've got different abilities, and how do you mix them together? But what I love is, for example, let's take Twinkl, like your comprehension, the whole idea is basically the same thing, but obviously the questions are being differentiated. And so I can say to them, why don't you have a go at this for a bit and that, and then obviously we'll come back and discuss our answers together. But there are always ways to make it work, whether it's, you know, colorful things, posters, you know, enlarged text, audio. So sometimes I know some of my students, perhaps, I mean, there's only so much writing obviously that they want to do. So sometimes I will we learned about an ocelot the other day, and I was like, okay, that's an interesting animal. But I myself admitted, I was like, I don't know much about it, but they were really eager to write about it. So I watched a video, and then I was like, you know what, I'm actually going to create a video comprehension. So then we had to do questions based on the video, and it was nice because I have some auditory learners, and they really enjoyed that kind of idea. So it's just kind of doing, I think, knowing what's kind of what they know. And I think as a teacher, like, you only know yourself as a teacher if you know your students, because that's like you know how best to cater to them.
No, that's a really good point. And I think once again, that's a lovely blend, like you say, as we talk about the topic of diversity, but also inclusion as well. And shout out to your lovely mum as well. The people who inspire us. It's so nice to hear. No, that is really lovely. Well, this sort of brings us on to our little quirky bit now, Aliza, which is for those of you who are familiar with our hashtag Landed and Stranded, so it's a little bit different this time around. So I know, Aliza, you've spoken to us before on our Instagram lives. And again, for anyone who's interested to hear a little bit more from Miss Liz, you can always go to our social media pages as well and have a listen. But this is actually a social media generated question. So this is from the ether, and they've come out with this question for this one today. So this is really interesting. I really enjoy doing this. So once again, I'm able to wield my little Twinkl powers to ask. So this person had asked, and it's a really interesting one because we do occasionally get quite a few like ITT students or ECTs, you know, who are thinking about doing tutoring either alongside or kind of actually turning the hand to it as a full-time thing, or they're looking for a position, a teacher position. So this is a primary ed student who's in our group, and they were asking that they really want to do a nice session. They're doing a little bit of tutoring, which is one-on-one with the student, and they want to sort of acknowledge and do a sort of kind of cultural inclusion style session, but they're wondering where to start. Apparently they're in year 4, so they feel that they could handle, you know, some nice comprehensions or some text, but they're just looking for a little bit of inspiration. What would you sort of suggest to them as someone who's so passionate about the subject?
So I think, I mean, perhaps I would say even kind of like delve into the student's interest. So for example, is it something like football? Is it something like paddle? Is it like a sport? And does that sport originate from somewhere? So you can almost start off from as to where it started. So for example, if it's cricket, I think we're looking obviously like a Pakistan and India kind of idea. So if it's something along the lines of that, then that could also, I think that'd be one way to do that. I think, for example, if they obviously are, for example, potentially if they are EAL, or if, for example, if they're not necessarily EAL, but they enjoy learning a language, and obviously children like sponges, and like when they're younger, it's great, they can learn so much. So
true.
If they have a particular language that they're learning at school, so I would say perhaps, you know, based doing, you know, do it on France, or, you know, there's something that you can relate it to. And I think that's just kind of the beauty of English. It's just so widespread in so many different ways, whether it's writing or comprehension or poetry or like, you know, like analyzing and things like that. So I think kind of work out what that child's interest is first, and then kind of break it down backwards. So whether it's sports, whether it's like writing, whether it's a language, you know, fashion, for example, like some of my students want to be fashion designers. So, you know, like, you know, let's look at, for example, like, you know, if you want to take like the Middle East, for example, or for example, you want to talk about like the Far East, they've got so many different ways in terms of like their differences, but it's so beautiful, like everyone, the way that they kind of dress. So yeah, I think work out what the child's interest is first and kind of work backwards from that.
That, honestly, I'm going to be noting that down myself. I love that idea. But that just goes to show, isn't it? You know, that notion of diversity, including, you can find it and you can discuss it in such a lovely way in any sort of topic. That's such a great idea. I love that, kind of the origin of the sport or like a country or fashion, something as lovely. You know, there's always a little tie back, a little nod. Oh, I absolutely love that, Aliza. That's a cracking one there.
Thank you.
We will be sharing that absolutely. That is fantastic. And I really hope that helps our little person who submitted that question, because it was a really good question. I thought it was really interesting.
Definitely. And thank you for doing that as well, because obviously by doing that, you've helped so many other teachers or ECT.
You never know. All teachers and educators like to know, don't they? We like to kind of magpie ideas wherever we can. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining us today, Aliza, and talking about this topic, sharing your tips, your ideas. And as I say, for anyone who's not seen the wonderful world of Miss Liz, I implore you to go and check her out, say hello. She's a lovely person, she's very friendly, and we'll be tagging her in all of our social comms and bits and bobs below in the comments. So thank you, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Spill the Tea, and we look forward to joining you in the next one. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.